Welcome in, Canucks fans, to episode 162, season 5 of the Canucks Speakeasy podcast. My name is Doug.
I am Brendan, aka Jabo.
Still no Pete this week, but Brendan, we got a game flight to get to amongst other big Canuck news. Let's get to it.
Yes,
The Canucks played
please.
the St. Louis Blues and came away with a 4-3 loss in overtime. Controversial loss as Petey took a cross check from Braden Shen, which then opened up the door for him to snipe one for the game winner. Pius Suter had a hat trick. Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, each with 2 assists.
And then the crazy game against Columbus. Most people looked at this game as a not an easy win, but a game that they should win, and it wasn't looking that way through 2 periods. As the Canucks went down 4-1. But if there was one thing you knew about Columbus going into that game, they knew how to blow a lead, and boy, did they blow a lead in that third period. Pettersson and Besser with 2, and Besser winds up with a hat trick, all on the power play, and then Pettersson in overtime give the Canucks a 5-4 win as they head into a prolonged All-Star break on I'll call it a semi-high.
Hey, first in the league when, everything was said and done. I know other teams are still playing, but I believe it's 71 points the Canucks have on the season right now.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, you can't be too disappointed about how the first 49 games have went. I mean, how can you really complain? No one saw this coming. So, I mean, let's just enjoy it. And now we get a few days off to, recharge, sort of, as we'll talk why we can't necessarily recharge, as we've had a little bit of a wrinkle thrown into the All-Star break, which wasn't, when you look at the track record of not just Jim Rutherford, but even going back to last year, what Patrick Allvin pulled off last year around this time, you kind of knew that there was a possibility that something could happen.
Yeah, and let's start there. Big news this morning. Patrick Allvin is extended. I believe I saw the number. It's the 3-year extension, which isn't that what Rutherford got? So they're kind of in line, in tow with one another. So I think, heading into this episode, we knew there was only 2 games to talk about. It was like, oh, Patrick Allvin got extended this morning. Great. You and I will have something to talk about. And yeah, I mean, I think Allvin has done a really good job. And after the extension, he wasted very little to no time to make an impression.
I was in my car, just driving back into Langley, where I live, and uh, Patrick Allvin was literally on the radio on Sportsnet 650, and it must have been maybe 45 seconds, maybe after that interview was done. I don't know. It was really in short order. A tweet comes out that says that a deal was going down for Elias Lindholm. So I mean, it's crazy. I mean, in terms of the extension, I'll be interested to see where this goes, because I mean, I would assume that Jim Rutherford won't. This will be it. 3 years will be it, and not necessarily because he's going to get fired, but more so because he's at the age where he would like to retire and probably spend some time with family, grandkids, and all of that. And I'll be interested to see what happens at the end of that 3 years, dependent obviously on where this team is. But maybe Patrick Allvin moves up and he takes over Rutherford's spot as the president of hockey ops, and then somebody, one of the assistants, or maybe somebody was up, but maybe hey, maybe somebody like Emily Castonguay takes over as the general manager. Um, uh,
Cammy
Cammy
Granato.
Granato as well, right? Maybe that's the ascension plan that we're looking at right now. Which, I with the way things are going right now, you could blame them for thinking that that's not a bad ascension plan over the next couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of Alvin's extension, like Rutherford's extension, it was 100% justified and deserved. They've turned around this team in 365 days in a way, because we just passed the year anniversary of
Yep. Rick Tocchet.
Rick Tocchet being hired, and what they've done both with roster turnover, and then what the coaching staff has done with this roster that they've put together. I mean, it's pretty remarkable stuff. Um, so yeah, 100% deserved, and I'll be interested because these guys don't mess around. I mean, much. And I compared it earlier to on Twitter to. I mean, we're around the same age. I mean, my first general manager I remember growing up. I mean, I was really really young, but it was Pat Quinn. And one thing I remember with Pat Quinn was is that no player was safe. Everybody was there to be traded at some point, and he made a lot of trades. But from the time he got here, I think I've thrown this stat out before, but from the time he got to Vancouver to the trade deadline in 1994, he made 49 trades. Some fan favorites here, whether it's Tony Tanti or Garth Butcher or Patrick Sundstrom. Some very popular guys left, and I mean the whole point was building the team that he felt could get them to where they ultimately would like to go. And I mean, obviously they got to a game of a Stanley Cup. And I really think that Jim Rutherford's out of that same mold, and his, I guess, protege in a way, Patrick Allvin, same thing. They're going to do what they think is right to get this team where they'd want it to go, which is to a Stanley Cup.
Yeah. Fun fact. My first favorite Canuck, Garth Butcher. And I remember I was like, I'm 40 years old. I turned 41 next month. So I think you and I are a year apart. Garth Butcher was my first favorite Canuck. And I remember crying when he got traded. And it turned out to be a great trade because wasn't that the trade they got Momesso and Ronning? I believe they both got Sergio Momesso and Cliff Ronning. But
yeah, I mean,
we should break.
Yeah, and Patrick Sundstrom. No, I was going to say Patrick Sundstrom got you Greg Adams and Kirk McLean.
So, yeah,
some of those trades worked out quite well. But I mean, again, it was one of those things like you, and it's why I'm sort of desensitized to what happened today, is because I've been through that before. Whether it was with him or then the Mike Keenan era, or then the Brian Burke era, trades just seem to happen. And obviously now that the cap era is here, they don't happen quite as much. Certainly, I mean, maybe we here in Vancouver are the exception to that rule, because this regime certainly has had no problems pulling the trigger and finding ways, and that's a credit to them. They're working the phones constantly, trying to find ways. A player gets injured, or in Chicago, Beauvillier gets traded within 24 hours of that. They find their opportunities, they look for those opportunities, and they're pretty ruthless in how they run this. And I mean, to me, it's all about being bold. These guys aren't going to be safe. It's about being bold. And their belief is that bold teams win cups. And, I mean, I can't blame them. I mean, it's exciting, and I'm going to enjoy this.
Well, and again, we'll get to the details of the trade in just a minute here, but in your opinion, who's been the boldest team the last 3-4 years? In my opinion, it's the Las Vegas Golden Knights. They made the Mark Stone trade. They went out and acquired Jack Eichel. Like, they traded fan favorite Marc-Andre Fleury. You know what I mean? They have been extremely bold, and they have swung for the fences. And I love seeing that from this management group. And, like you said, that's kind of Jim Rutherford's MO. Funny thing, again, we'll get to the details of the trade in just a second, but you were talking about listening to the radio, and Patrick Allvin, within 45 seconds of getting off his radio hit with whoever he was on with.
It was Satyar Shah and
it was Sat. Okay.
And Israel Fair, I believe, who were on the radio.
Okay. But a similar thing happened today, and I watch the show sometimes, occasionally. It's very Toronto based, but Overdrive on TSN. It's got O-Dog is on it, and Jamie McLennan. It's a very Toronto slanted thing, but they had Jim Rutherford on today. And he was asked, hey, are you going to be making any trades after the trade deadline? And Rutherford said today on the show, we might be doing something not before the trade deadline, but after the All-Star game. And Rutherford said, we might be doing something before the All-Star game. He said that today in the afternoon before the tweet even went out. And he's like, I can't get into the details. And they just laughed at him and thought he was joking, but clearly he wasn't. But let's get to the details of the trade. So the trade breaks down like this. The Canucks send Andrei Kuzmenko, Hunter Brzeskevich, Yanni Yermo, a 2024 first-round pick, and a conditional 2024 fourth round pick to the Calgary Flames for Elias Lindholm. Brendan, what are your thoughts on the trade?
Well, I mean, on the surface, you look at that and you go, "Well, that's a lot for a guy that isn't playing up to his potential." But I also look at it. I also look at, and this is sort of my overwhelming thought on this trade, is that they were able to get a top six center, a guy that a right shot center, which for this
Yep.
team is extremely valuable, and not just any center, the guy who's taken the third most draws in the NHL this year, and won them at an almost 56% clip. So from that sort of a situational standpoint, you've got somebody good. And from the asset management point of view, you were able to get him without giving up one of Hoglander, Podkolzin, Villander, or Lekaramaki.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is big because I mean, and I would assume it probably came down to the first rounder or one of those assets. And as I will always say, I would rather go with the known commodity over the unknown commodity. And we're starting to know what Lekaramaki's turning into. Villander still has a year, like a couple of years more before we see him, but we kind of are getting an idea of what he is. And obviously, we know what Hoglander has been this year, on pace for 20 to 25 goals, playing in a limited role on the fourth line. And so the potential for him to expand that role in the next 2 to 3 years is looking pretty good considering the way he's scoring, and it's just really for him building that consistency. And then Podkolzin, who had a really great start to the year in the AHL, was scoring at a pretty crazy rate to begin it. Had that unfortunate concussion that kept him out for a while, and now he seems to be starting to figure it out again. My assumption is he's going to get the same treatment as Hoglander got, and he's probably going to be in Abbotsford, for most of, if not the entirety of this season. Now, obviously, things could change, and one of these guys can go if they ended up finding another deal that they like, and I would assume that this management group isn't done yet. But again, like you're able to get a top six right shot center, forward. I mean, I guess he can play the wing as well, and you didn't have to give up any of your major prospects. All due respect to Hunter Brzustevich, who's been fantastic in the OHL this year, near the top of the league in scoring for most of this year as a defenseman. But that's what drafting well will get you. It gives you assets that mean something to a team, because there's no guarantee that Brzustevich is going to develop. I mean, he might turn into a very good player, but there's no guarantee. So you sold high on him, and you kept most of us would consider your blue chip prospects still in the fold.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that is worth mentioning is there were reports that Kuzmenko was going to be in the deal, but he has, I think it's a 10 or 12 team no trade, and Calgary was on that list. And then I think it was Rick Dollywall reported that Dan Milstein is, talking with Kuzmenko as we speak to try to get him to waive his no trade. There was reports that even if Kuzmenko did decline going to Calgary, that the trade still would have got done, but it would have been more prospects and maybe more picks going the other way. I do wonder if Kuzmenko didn't waive, if a Podkolzin would have been going the other way, or another guy that you didn't mention who is starting to kind of light it up. When I say light it up kind of loosely in the AHL, is Atu Rati, who the Canucks got last year in
For
the Bo
sure.
Horvat deal. He's starting to play a lot better as well. But you're right. I think it's great value. You can't undersell the fact that Lindholm is a center, which I think is the most important position amongst your forward groups easily. He's a top six player. He's 2 years removed from scoring 40 goals. His two-way play is good as well. He's actually a really good two-way player. He can play
Yeah,
tough minutes on the
he
PK.
was up for a Selkie, I think.
I think he was in the top 5 voting the year he had 40 goals. I think he
Yeah,
got top 5 votes for the Selkie.
I'll have to look at that.
But, and Brzustevich, yes, he's been playing great, absolutely phenomenal. but you sell high on him, and I think that's good. I think that that's a solid thing. I really like the guy, but if the Canucks can sell high on him and get a player like Lindholm, I think it's great. The other thing with Kuzmenko being added to the deal is Kuzmenko, his $5 million are no longer, they're off the cap for next year, right? So
Yeah.
you've just saved yourself $5 million next year. Not to mention this deal, you're actually saving 650,000 in cap this year.
So
Kuzmenko actually makes, yeah,
I'll
go ahead.
I'll just say this, that Lindholm was a finalist for the Selke in 21-22. He finished second in Selke voting.
Oh, wow.
I assume he lost to Patrice Bergeron that year. I mean, because it's
Yeah.
Patrice Bergeron.
Yeah. It's crazy when you got Datsuk and
Yes,
Bergeron winning
y-
the Selke the last
yes,
20
it
years.
was Bergeron that year who won. So
And you know what? Calgary, the last couple of years, obviously a lot's happened there, right? I know Lindholm's having a down year, quote unquote, down year, but with Goudreau leaving, Kachuk leaving, Sutter coming in and seemingly blowing up that dressing room, and not in a good way, in a very negative way. Lindholm just hasn't been himself these last couple of years. I do think coming into, what seems to be a much more positive situation with Vancouver, I think he's gonna be a Rick Tocchet guy. Like, I think he's a guy who plays very well both ends of the ice. He's got a really good shot too. I remember, games
and
against the Canucks.
that's
He's
what
his
he
shot is
was.
great. Yeah,
I
man. 40 goals is
no,
nothing to sleep on.
I think and I really look at it, and much in the same way that Kuzmenko has struggled here, I think
Yep.
Huberdeau is in a way sort of the exact same type of player in that he played in sort of a more open system in Florida for years and years and years, and then got to Calgary where he was playing in a much more structured system in Calgary, and it just didn't work for him, and it's not working for him. He's really, really struggled to find his way playing that way. Um, and so Lindholm, his best year scoring, I think it was 42 goals, was on a line with Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. So you lose those two guys, and Huberdeau is supposed to be that guy that he's going to ride shotgun with over the last couple of years. Problem being that Huberdeau struggled in the system, struggled to grasp the concept of the way that they want him to play, and so that facilitator just hasn't been there. So now the hope is that you're going to put Lindholm on a line with Pedersen because, as we know, Tocchet likes his duos. He likes his
Yeah.
duos. So, you've obviously got Besser and Miller, and now you'll put Pedersen and Lindholm together. And you know, Pedersen, as much as he's got a great shot, he's a great facilitator as well. He can make good players better, and so that's the hope is you put those two together, and you can hopefully find a little chemistry. And it is really on, and I do think this coaching staff is up to the challenge because they've shown that they're up to the challenge. Is getting the most out of Elias Lindholm to bring back the things that he does well and getting him playing that style that that he is capable of. And it will be interesting because there's no guarantee this is going to work out. Trades haven't worked out in the past, but I think most fans here are at least more confident that with this coaching staff they'll be able to find a way because this isn't a situation where his best year, Lindholm's best year, was playing under a very structured system in under Daryl Sutter in Calgary. So I don't think there's any worry that he's going to come in here and not be able to grasp the concept of skating and forward checking and all that, because those were things that Daryl Sutter, sort of staples of his as well. So it'll be interesting, and they're picking up early, which is an MO of Jim Rutherford going back a long time to his Carolina days. He likes to get deals done early. So this gives Lindholm a time to acclimate himself to the system and to the players and to the team and deal with other stuff with family and all that stuff that we fans don't think about, but are part of the the whole part of being an NHL player is having family and moving them around or setting them up to be okay. So but I'm excited because I think they're getting a good player, and I think they're definitely getting a useful player, and a player that instantly makes them better than they were, 2 hours ago.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, Kuzmenko still was getting some time on the first unit power play, but he was seemingly ineffective. He wasn't really doing much,
Yeah,
generating much offense. And I do think Lindholm, if he ends up getting first unit power play minutes, which I think he should, I think he adds another element to that power play,
put him in
which
the
I
bumper.
know. Well, exactly. He's
He's your
got a
bumper
great
guy.
shot.
And I
And
think that's
outside
where
of
he
that
played
last game
that's where he
in
played. I
Calgary.
think he was the bumper guy. So you have a guy who's capable of being your bumper guy. Now, granted, he's a right shot, so he'd have to play the other side of the bumper. You have to play on the right side and as opposed to the left side. But still, like I mean, again, it gives you options.
Yeah, and outside of the last game against the Blue Jackets where the Canucks exploded on the power play, and that's probably more to do with the Blue Jackets than the actual Canucks power play. But I do think this is a great addition for the Canucks. I love, and I agree with you. Rutherford's MO of going out and getting your guy early, so he's got as much time to try to gel with the new team. And Calgary to Vancouver isn't cross country move, so it shouldn't be that much of a burden on his family. But that's a great point to bring up too. And you get him in the door early, get him acclimated to the systems that talk it and the rest of the coaching and skills coaches are putting in place. He'll get time to work with the Sedins, which I still don't think we're talking about enough of as much as their impact this year on this team. And you see, especially that third line, the Bluger, Garland, Joshua line, just the way that line cycles the puck. I'm not saying they're as good as what the Sedins were, but they cycle the puck very well. And I do think the Sedins have a hand in that. And I don't think they gave up a ton to get him. Yes, Briskevich is great in the first round pick this year. The way the Canucks are playing, that's probably going to be closer to an early second, late first, early second pick as far as value goes. The other thing that kind of was being circulated before we heard the details of this trade, and I just want your thoughts on this, is apparently Chris Tanev was going to be included in this trade, but that didn't happen. But there's still lots of speculation that the Canucks are also trying to acquire Chris Tanev in a separate trade. Obviously, acquisition cost is always important, but what are your thoughts if the Canucks can acquire a Chris Tanev and bring him back?
Well, I think first off, I think probably the asking again. I mean, and sorry, this regime made it clear that they do not want to subtract from this roster. So my guess is the ask for Tanev would have been adding a Hoglander. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe then, or maybe a Podkolzin or someone of that ilk, and they just weren't um, willing to do that. And uh, I don't think it's any real secret, how well he's liked in that dressing room, Chris Tanev here in Vancouver. I mean, he was a warrior for this team, and obviously Quinn Hughes has a ton of respect for the player that he is and what he brings, not just on the ice but in the locker room as well as a person. And obviously something can still get done. And again, I think the Canucks. I think if the Canucks are going to give up, something of real something a known commodity I guess I'll put it from now on. I'll just call it a known commodity. I mean, I don't know if Tanev's the guy that they're going to give up a known commodity for. I think especially because he's going to be a rental, and he's what is he 34? So he's
Yeah.
not young, and he does have a tendency to get injured. I mean, he does. I mean, that's been an issue for him. Health has been an issue. So would I like to have Chris Tanev in this lineup? Absolutely. Who wouldn't want to have Chris Tanev in the lineup? But I mean, again, in this situation, it would have to make sense. Um, Obviously, I think the Canucks would want another defenseman because at the end of the day, in the playoffs, and especially we know this well in 2011, you can never have enough defensemen. And right now the Canucks, Susie, unfortunately has had trouble. And I mean, not to no fault of his own, when you're taking a puck to the back of your leg or a puck to the knuckle, it's not really your fault. Um, so I mean, I think they want to get deeper on their blue line, and I guess it'll just come down to cost. and weighing the benefits of it. I mean, again, I go back to this deal for Elias Lindholm. They did not give up a known commodity. They gave up a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the aim for them, with whatever deal they make moving forward here, to try to maybe get shore up that blue line, is to trade something of a future as opposed to a known commodity.
Yeah, I mean, Kuzmenko, I guess, was a known commodity, but he's definitely fallen out of favor with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
coaching
and I
staff.
guess I said, yeah, you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's true. But I mean, it's clear. I think we can all agree it just wasn't working here, which is disappointing. Because I think most of us liked Kuzmenko and enjoyed watching him play.
Yeah.
And just unfortunately, sometimes things don't work out.
No, and I also think, there was a lot of speculation because Kuzmenko's name has come up in trade talks for, at least a month now, I would say, if not longer, that he was probably just going to be a salary dump, that he was going to go to Chicago for maybe a pick. And, you're just going to be able to cut ties and save money. But now you turn him into some actual value coming back the other way. I've got some information to share with you in regards to that condition on the 4th-round pick. The condition is if the Canucks make the Western Conference final, that pick goes from a 4th-rounder to a 3rd-rounder. This was confirmed by Flames general manager Craig Conroy. So the condition on the 4th-round pick, if the Canucks make it to the Western Conference, it goes from a 4th to a 3rd. Again, I'm
If
okay with
they,
it.
yeah, if they
You
make
know
it to
what I
the
mean?
Western Conference Final, no one's sitting here going, "Oh shit, that
No,
fucking third rounder." No one cares. No one cares
no.
because at the end of the day, the whole point is to get this team as close as it possibly can, and hopefully win a Stanley Cup. You got to sometimes you got to be bold, and
Yeah.
I mean, they're doing it.
Well, and I think it shouldn't be understated how much of a win it is for them to save that 5 million heading into next year. Whether or not they're able to, maybe that's the difference of them being able to resign a guy like Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger. Maybe they try and make a pitch towards Elias Lindholm to stay if everything works out. The other thing I mentioned this and again, I don't want to be an alarmist. I think PD wants to stay. I don't think he's going to go. I just think, PD comes across as a very private person. I don't think he likes being in front of a camera. I don't think he likes, being asked a ton of questions. But let's just say PD does want out and he isn't planning to re-sign, you now have an insurance policy with the acquisition of Elias Lindholm, which again, I'm not saying PD wants out. I don't think he wants out. I think he's going to remain a Canuck. Is he going to sign a max 8-year term deal? Probably not. I could see him go more short term, like an Austin Matthews did. Maybe it's a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal, but you've given yourself a backup policy if things go sideways with Petey. And, he's still RFA anyway. So even if he doesn't want to stay and sign long term, you can trade him and get some return pieces back. But you've given yourself that, little bit of an emergency, break in case of an emergency
Yeah.
window. Which is great. And I think that is another part of this trade that I don't think a lot of people are looking at. And personally, the package they gave up to get Lindholm, I'm I feel better about that than I would have if they have given up the same package for a guy like Jake Gensel. And I think Gensel's great, and I think he's got power or pardon me, playoff pedigree. But I think Lindholm fits what this team needs better, and I think he is he can be deployed and used in far more ways than Gensel can. And I'm glad. I would rather have them get Lindholm than Gensel, especially with what they gave up. And I don't think they gave up a ton to get him. And when do the Canucks play again? I think we've got another 8 days until the next game.
Oh yeah.
Canucks now have 6 players at the All-Star game as well, if you count Lindholm as a Canuck, which I think is hilarious. I'm guessing it'll be the same thing as Bo Horvat last year, where Horvat still wore the Canuck jersey.
But he,
But
but he,
yeah,
but
that'll be
in the
interesting.
in the game itself, if I remember right, he wore the Islanders helmet,
Yeah, I think you're right.
because I
And this
remember
year
it.
it's
Yeah, because he scored that
well, they're doing the
goal.
draft.
Yeah,
They're doing the draft this year too, right? So that'll be interesting.
and so Petey and Hughes are on the same team, so it would be kind of appropriate if they just drafted Elias Lindholm. Why not, right?
Yeah, I love it. But no, man, like I think when all this was going down, I think it's great. And Rick Dollywall was on with Sat and Israel Fair just before we hit record, and he was saying he still thinks the Canucks are going to go after defensemen.
Yeah,
He still feels like that is going to happen, whether it's going to be Chris Tanev or not. They're definitely going to try to make that work. But I know Toronto is really interested in Tanev as well, and that could potentially drive the price up and, essentially make the Canucks fall out of contention to acquire Tanev. But Dollywall still thinks the Canucks now, their main focus is to acquire defensemen.
yeah,
And it's also strange because this past couple of days, and I know Frege threw this out there, but Zadorov's name's come up in trade talks, which I think is interesting. And again, I love how this management group, they
yeah,
can make a deal. And Zadorov's been fine. He hasn't, been great, but he's been fine. But I love how this group will make a trade and they don't kind of fall in love with their players. They're always looking at the next move. And if trading Zadorov can facilitate a different move, 2-3 moves ahead, it's like a grandmaster at chess. I love that.
yeah.
And I love that they're not afraid to go ahead and make a deal, even though they just traded for a player, but they're going to use them to potentially acquire another player that they think could be even more valuable to this team.
Well, I think the thing with the Zadorov, with the Zadorov, I mean, I don't know, like, I think what this management group does is that they weigh all of their options, right? And so to facilitate a deal like this, where you need to get cap off of your books, in order to make it work, make the money work, you have to explore a lot of different options, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they were actively shopping Zadorov. I think they were just weighing their options. That, hey, eh, you know, if we were to get player A and have to give up Zadorov, yeah, I mean, we don't like having a guy like Zadorov in the playoffs is important because he's big, he can skate, he's physical, he's the kind of guy that you want. Um, but if we have to trade him to make our team better here, I mean, we can do that. And again, it's all about exploring options, trying to figure out. I, you know, I would think that Zadorov's name was just one of many that would probably explored out there just to see what the asking or what the return would be. You know, if you trade Zadorov, do you have to retain or take back salary in order to make that work? Stuff like that. So I don't think it was necessarily okay. Yeah, that anything was imminent, that they were on the verge of trading him. It's again just exploring options. Not just having a plan A, but having a plan A, B, C, and D and E, and then maybe connecting two of those plans together to make something work. Which is in this day and age with the cap, with 90% of these teams not able to make moves because the cap. That's sort of what you got to do. It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle that you have to piece together, and sometimes you're going to have to make moves that you don't necessarily want, but if it makes your team better, then you do it. And I think if Zadorov were to ever get traded, it's because they feel that they're getting something in return, whether it's in that deal or in an adjacent deal to it, that helps them. And again, it's not. I think some people like, oh, I mean, how could they not like Zadorov? I don't think it's necessarily about not liking Zadorov. I don't think it's about them not liking the player, not liking the fit, or anything like that. It's just about exploring options and ways to make this team better.
Yeah, and I think any good general manager, you have to listen to
Yeah,
anything and everything that comes your way, whether someone's calling you and inquiring about Zadorov, or you're just putting a feeler out there to see what his value potentially could have. And you brought up earlier the Beauvillier trade to Chicago. Well, that trade is pretty much what facilitated the Canucks to be able to go out and acquire Zadorov, because they were able to wipe out Beauvillier's cap hit off their books, so they could fully retain on Zadorov. Because apparently, I believe I heard a report that the Leafs were very interested in Zadorov, but they didn't want to retain. They wanted Calgary to retain, and Calgary didn't want to retain any salary. That's the other thing with the Lindholm trade. No salary retention whatsoever. Which I don't think there would have been, because again, the Canucks end up saving 650,000 on the deal with Kuzmenko going the other way. So yeah, man, I'm really interested to see, and obviously, I guess that means this team's all in this year. I mean, that's how I look
Well,
at this, right? And yet
let's
they
like
didn't have to give up any high
again,
prospects.
exactly right. So let's maybe like because all in would mean that they're giving up guys like Vlander or Lekaramaki or Hoglander or Podkolzin, and they're not. So I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think they're all in. I think what we're seeing is this management group is what's the word I'm looking for? They're 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 giving back to their players who they
Yes.
feel have given to them all they can to learn this new system, to play the way they want them to play, and to get them off to the greatest start this franchise has ever had. And so you have to like reward is what I'm looking the word I'm looking for. They're rewarding them for all the things that they've done, and so they've done a good job of making it look like they're going all in without actually going all in, because they've kept those known commodities around that they hope are going to be a part of the future of this team. Um, and I'll say this, part of the reason you're able to make deals is because this team is good. When
Yep.
your team is good, it makes teams want your players. As opposed to last year, you couldn't give away anybody on this team without a sweetener outside of Hughes, Pedersen, and hell, I mean, there were talk about Miller. You'd have to just basically yard sale his contract and not get anything back for
Yeah.
him. This year,
Demko would have been the other guy that might
Demko
have
would have been
not.
the other guy,
Yeah.
right? And now you're looking at. I mean, there are pretty much no one on this roster that a team wouldn't be happy to get right now.
Hmm.
A Garland again at the beginning of the season, you couldn't give him away. Now, I don't think there's a team in the league that wouldn't find a way to get the cap space to bring him in, considering the way he's playing in a more structured system. And it's what I always had hoped to see, that when you got that more structured system with this group, you would see these players flourish and play much better. And it's been nice to see, I mean, and so now, looking just beyond the season, and I don't want to look beyond the season, but looking to the off season, it does give you options. You can make moves in the summer now with players and change the dynamic of this team. Maybe this summer you trade a Connor Garland. You get that salary off of your books because you feel good enough about, or either internally, or finding somebody on a cheaper contract to do what he does, and then you re-sign an Elias Lindholm.
Yeah. Hoglander is the guy that I think that
Yeah,
theoretically could step in and take over. And
exactly,
I'm not
right?
just saying it because of his height, but he's a
No,
guy who plays a similar style to
Podkolzin as well, right?
Garland.
You have to
Podkolzin,
assume
yeah.
Podkolzin's going to be a part. So maybe the ascendancy plan is to maybe you look at trading a Connor Garland, and then you move a Hoglander up to the third line, and then you start Podkolzin on the fourth line and see if he can grow from there. So again, and not saying any of this is going to happen, but again,
No.
but being a good team gives you options much more than you are when you're not a good team, as we've seen. And so it's nice talking and being able to talk about being able to make this team better without having to give things away.
Yeah, and
Um,
the other thing too is I think it's just such a stark contrast from the previous management group because, and again, I think Jim Benning took a lot of shit and unfortunate shit in this market. There
yeah,
was that report that his son got beat up. I think it was in Yale Town or some shit like that, and just totally uncalled for. There's that weirdo who fucking stalked him in the grocery store when the mask mandate and the travel ban was on. Just weird shit. But I do think that that group they had so much tunnel vision and what they wanted, and they would fall in love with this one specific player, and that was it.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And I think this group is always looking. This current management group is always looking on how to improve this team, and I think it's great. And the other thing you brought up, about heading into free agency next year is guys are going to want to come here now and come here on a discount because before guys would only want to come here if they were overpaid because the team sucked and it's like, well, unless you're going to offer me the Brinks truck, there's no reason I want to go and play for you unless I'm going to be making a ton of money. Yes, the city's beautiful, all that stuff, but it's just like you need to overpay guys like Beagle, Del Zotto,
and
and
yeah.
that's not happening now. And
And
I
and,
think,
and if you
as the culture of winning goes up,
yeah.
people are going to want to come here.
And if say like you can't re-sign a Pia Suter or a Teddy Bluger or whatever, that ticket's too much, and they go elsewhere, but they make really good money and on getting a more of a long-term contract somewhere else. You know that other players that might fit that same bill as those two guys have might want to come here and be like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll take that 1 year deal because I know I've seen it. There is now a track record of players that may not have had that track record coming in who were able to go there, have success, and get more money, whether that's in Vancouver or somewhere else. And so you build that sort of respect around the league. And the coaching staff here deserves a lot of credit for being able to build that, to bring in these players, to build this system, to get the buy in to the structure that they want. And turn guys like Teddy Bluger, a guy like Teddy Bluger, who played a role in Vegas and winning their cup, but playing a much bigger role now, as arguably the best third line in hockey for the last 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, I just look at, guys, just how much this team has evolved over the last year, and just, how we have really got to see how this team has evolved. And, you've got guys, all these guys really hitting their stride. And I think, they gave up one guy from the roster to get Elias Lindholm in the door, and a guy who I think was liked by his teammates, but a guy who has fallen out of favor with the coaching staff. And the one time, I think maybe there's been twice this year, because there was the headline where someone wrote that, Talkett buries Pedersen post game or something like that. And I think Talkett took umbrage with that. And the only other time I saw Talkett kind of, get a little snarky with the media this year was another game where Kuzmenko got benched and someone asked him about it, and he
And
said
he
he
got
didn't want
tired
to
of it.
talk about him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, that's the only times. And now that's also like kind of a stress relief for Talkett, that he doesn't have to talk about why Kuzmenko is sitting on the bench and how he went from 39 goals last year to what's he got, like 8 goals this year, I
Yeah.
believe, 9. And so I think that's great as well. The other thing too, I do wonder with Lindholm, and I know every player is going to try to cash in and get as much money as possible, but I almost wonder if he would sign a 1 year extension to just kind of a show me, prove me contract where he can pad his stats playing with a guy like Pedersen for another year and then go and sign a big long-term contract with whether it's the Canucks or whoever else. I know Taylor Hall did that a couple of years ago, where I think he signed. It was coming off a year. I think it was one of the years after he left New Jersey. It wasn't right after his Hart Trophy year, but a couple years after that, I think he went and signed a 1 year deal. I forget where it was. It's kind of like a bet on me deal, right? And then he ended up getting a longer term deal. So I wonder if that's something that might happen with Lindholm. I know most players want security of the long term contract, especially just in case of injury. But we have seen guys take those shorter term deals to try to really cash in the following year. And maybe that's something that could happen as well. But yeah, man, I love the trade.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I mean, I'll love it once I see it, but like on just from
Yes,
the
yes.
out, a lot of unknowns right now. He hasn't played a game in a Canucks jersey yet, but on the surface of it, I mean, this team is, like I said, at the beginning, this team is better than it was a couple of hours ago. And he fills as a right shot center, he fills probably the biggest hole on this roster. Um, and a top six center at that. So I mean, he's a top six forward who is right shot and can win draws at an amazing clip, and that's something that this team was lacking. And it's you look back at the 2011 team when you had a guy like Manny Malhotra, who was
Yep.
your right shot center and was winning, who could be capable of winning faceoffs. It takes a lot of pressure off of other guys. It takes a lot of pressure off of a JT Miller, who's I mean, his face-off percentage this year is ridiculous too. I think both him and Lindholm are right in the same sort of in the same area, right around that 55-56%. Takes pressure off of Teddy Bluger as well, who hasn't been bad in the draw. I think he's just slightly sub 50, which isn't bad. But it takes pressure off of him as well. Pia Suter as well, and it'll be interesting to see how it works out. And it gives Pedersen a running mate. It certainly gives a guy. It's a guy who can forecheck, who can play a gritty, tough game, and down the stretch here. I mean, I'm excited to see how this goes and how this works out, and heading into the playoffs, because as much as I don't like, to put the cart ahead of the horse here, I mean, it does seem like this team is going to be in the playoffs this year. And again, fans are out there going, "Of course they are," and I'm like, "Oh well, I've been a Canuck fan, so I'm just gonna until that magic number is 0. I'm gonna sit there and think, I'll be somewhat nervous."
Well, at the beginning of the season, you, Pete, and I all predicted that the Canucks were going to miss the playoffs this year. And I think that was more of us just trying to,
Yeah, well, I mean,
reverse
yeah,
psychology the situation.
and I said this. I can't remember if I was on with you or on with Pete, but I said this a few weeks ago, that I don't think it was necessarily that we didn't think they were capable of it. I think it was just that we've been here before,
Yeah.
and this season was a time to put up or shut up. And for me, I was just I said it, that I'm going to say no until they prove me wrong,
Yeah.
because I've said yes and I thought they were capable of it. So now I'm just going to say no. Go out and show me. And well, through the first 49 games, boy, have they shown me.
Yeah. Should we head to the free pour here, Brendan?
We shall.
Okay. Do you need to cue up your background?
Yeah, okay. Do you want me to do that right now?
Yeah. If you
You're
want
gonna
to cue
put
up
it
your
on pause?
background, no.
Okay.
You can cue up your background and I'll jump into mine just while you get yours queued up. Your production value is always better than mine. But I wanted to talk about a really cool documentary I watched on Amazon. It's 48 minutes, so it's pretty short. Sometimes being short is a good thing. In this particular case, I don't know if it was a good thing or not, but it's the Alexander Dag documentary on Amazon called The Chosen One. I thought it was really good. I think you get to understand Dag and where he came from. His rookie contract is essentially what ended up, causing a big stir and resulted in one of the factors that resulted in a lockout the following year. And yeah, you just get to, he talks about his journey and, at that time, and we're seeing this now with a guy like Patrick Laine, who just, checked himself into the PA, uh, program for help and, stuff like that. You didn't really have those things when Dag was a player. And it's really cool. He's a pretty stoic guy, and he talks about his career generally positively. But one of the things that was really interesting is he talks about seeing a movie, and there's a scene in the movie, and they actually showed the scene in the documentary, and just this one scene in this movie that really kind of hit him because he felt like that was him, and it's from Good Will Hunting, and it's the scene when Ben Affleck is talking to Matt Damon and he's like, "I wish I was you." He's like, "You've got the talent that none of us fucking have. And I'll be working this job for the next 10 years. You're the one guy that can get out of here and do something with themselves. So do it." And, Dag talks about that movie and how it really kind of hit him. And like, he felt like he had scored 50 goals in junior, which was like a record. And then he just kind of lost it. He didn't ever, he had mild success in the NHL, but yeah, man, it's a great little documentary. It's 47 minutes long. It's definitely worth your time. Chosen One, the Alexander Dag story.
I actually watched that scene from Good Will Hunting. It popped up on my Instagram feed for some odd reason, and that's such a. I mean that movie's got more than one powerful moment, but
Yeah,
that one always sticks out. That he's always thinking that people think he owes it to himself, and and his best friend is the one to tell him that, no, you owe it to me, because
exactly.
I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and be 50, and I'm gonna still be doing this shit. But you're sitting on a golden ticket, and you're too much of a pussy to cash it in.
Yep.
It's just, yeah, that's such a great scene. Well, sticking with movies, I the other night got to watch the new Mission Impossible movie, and anybody who knows me knows I love action movies. I love them. I think they're awesome. And yeah, Tom Cruise, off camera might not be the most sane human being on the planet, but that motherfucker can make a movie. And
Yep.
it's another. I mean, and he's 60 years old. He's still doing all this crazy shit. Oh man! And the movie was fun. It was a wild ride. Probably a little like towards the. I mean, there at times probably a little more CGI than I would like. But I mean, hell, I mean, you can't pull off all. He does enough of his stunts where you're just like, my God, a 60-year-old guy still doing it. And I loved it, and I love the fact that apparently there's a script out for a new Top Gun movie, which I think is going to be fantastic. And again, Tom Cruise may not be the most sane human being, but guy can make a movie and made a really good action movie. So, Mission Impossible, the new one, watch it. It's great. I'm sure there'll be another.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Episode 162 of season 5 is in the books. Yeah, I was honestly, when we were trying to schedule what day we were going to record this week, I'm like, man, I don't know what we're going to talk about, and then the Patrick
I
Allvin
know.
thing came up. It's like, great. And then I was like, we got 2 games. I'm like, ugh, okay. And then the trade dropped, which is great. But yeah, like you said, Brendan, I'm really excited to see Lindholm join the Canucks and see what the lines look like and the power play looks like. Yeah, man, very excited.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but be anything but excited. I mean, no one knows how this is going to work out, but as I said, we've got a lot more faith in what our pro scouting is doing right now, and what this coaching staff has shown that they're capable of doing when they get players that fit what they like. That they can get the best out of them. So, I am certainly cautiously optimistic that this is going to work out well.
And quickly, Super Bowl predictions. We got the Chiefs versus the
Oh,
49ers. I know you and I
fuck.
had the Ravens versus the
Man,
49ers.
this was like the worst case scenario. I couldn't like
I
I
know.
like I was at halftime of that Detroit San Francisco. I'm thinking, oh, Dan Campbell in the Super Bowl,
Me
fucking
too.
amazing. And of course, Detroited that game away. I mean, only they could have a ball have the ball bounce off the head of their off of one of their safeties and drop right into the hands of a San Francisco receiver. Oh, and then the fumble, and it just, and then Dan
Going for
Campbell,
it on
who,
4th down.
yeah, which
Yeah.
you know what, he had done it all year, so I'm not going to sit here and give him shit for doing. I mean, it's what got them there, and so far be it for any of us to second guess the move that he made. So who do I have? Oh man, I guess I'm picking San Francisco. I guess, although no, you know what? I'm changing that. I think Kansas City is going to win that game for one real reason, and that's because Steve Spagnuolo has that Kansas City defense
Yep.
playing amazing. They're winning them games. It's not Mahomes in the offense. It's that defense. And I think Brock Purdy just is not a good quarterback. I think Brock Purdy is a product of having some pretty fucking amazing players around him and is not that good. And he's probably going to get exploited by a defense that's playing pretty damn well.
Yeah, I look, I give Purdy credit. He did step up in that Detroit game. The Ravens were an absolute no-show, by the way. Like,
Oh,
I don't know what happened there. Like, they just did not play well whatsoever. Yes, Spagnuolo and that defense of the Chiefs definitely deserves a ton of credit, but they ran the ball 6 times. They were the lead. I believe they led the league in rushing yards all year, and they ran the ball 6 times with the running back. I think Lamar had a handful of rushes on his own, but 6 rushes, like actual play call rushes. Just, what are you doing? I don't know what happened in that game.
they went
I'm
away from
leaning
what they were. That was the thing.
exactly. Exactly. I'm leaning towards the 49ers. I think it's a cool story. I think Brock Purdy, like, again, Purdy actually had more rushing yards in the game against the Lions than um,
Lamar Jackson.
Lamar Jackson did against the Chiefs, which is crazy. Yes, you have to be good to be lucky, and the San Francisco 49ers were definitely lucky. But yeah, I think the 49ers pull it out on top. You can
Uh,
follow me. Oh,
yes, hold
sorry,
on.
go
I'll
ahead.
say I'll say I'll say final score Kansas
Ooh,
City 24, San Francisco 21.
nice. So by a field goal, I'm going to say 33-27 for the
Ooh.
49ers.
Okay. All right. All right.
33-27 for the 49ers,
All right. Give us our outro.
which we forgot at the beginning of the show again, but it's
You know
okay.
what? Hey, shit. Hey,
uh,
big shit happens. So
I
it
agree. I
happens.
agree. You can follow me on Twitter at Doug Venn, our third co-host who is still traveling South America. You can follow him. That's Pete underscore gas. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Canuck Speak.
I think he's isn't he like in a bar in Bolivia or something like that right now? He was in a
I
bar somewhere. I think that's what he
I
said.
don't know if he's still in Bolivia, but yes, he said he was in a bar somewhere where the
Somewhere. Yeah.
Wi-Fi was good, but it was too loud to join us.
Yeah, well, I mean, have
Eh.
fun, Pete. And I'm Brendan, aka Jabo. You can follow me, Jabo, JABO _ and obviously we are also on YouTube. So please click the subscribe button and come check out our ugly mugs.
Thanks for listening.